and welcome to the NTN Morning Update for today, the 4th of August. It's a Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching on air and online, a special welcome to you, residents here in St. Lucia, as well as St. Lucians in the diaspora and well-wishers globally. A special good morning to you. I just want to go over the headlines for this morning. The Ministry of Health commends vigilant community in reporting of quarantine protocol violation. Also, Gender Relations Minister says services for gender-based violence should be declared essential services. Members of the public urged to play their part to reduce vector-borne illness, and special education teachers are singled out for praise. We have the details to these stories and more coming out of the government of St. Lucia in just a moment.
Overnight, growing national unrest.
Society, a digital cashless society, one world currency.
A vaccine for COVID-19.
Midtown
Droplet COVID patient
virus. Macy's iconic flagship.
Virus
Set inside
the coronavirus.
Everybody vaccinated.
On the corona pandemic.
Opposition to the lockdown.
An infected conspiracy theories.
Bizarre
claims.
The truth about the origin of COVID-19 hidden from the rest of the world. And the Chinese.
In this constantly changing environment, resulting in sensory overload, cut through the noise and tune in to the National Television Network, the official source of information, all facts.
Thank you so much for staying tuned. If you're just joining us, this is the NTN Morning Update for today, Tuesday, the 4th of August, 2020. We'd like to welcome each and every one of you for joining the live on Facebook and on YouTube this morning. We have a few updates coming from the government of St. Lucia, and of course we're coming to you live from the GIS studios, the Information Command Center. A gentle reminder that St. Lucia remains under a state of emergency, and while the restrictions have lessened to some extent with the slow reopening, the phased reopening of our society, there are still measures, protocols that have been put in place for the protection of the population, and we do hope you are taking those measures seriously. The use of the mask, the washing of your hands, the use of sanitizer, the 6-foot physical distancing, taking note of all of those. We begin with something, a Ministry of Health statement commending vigilant community in reporting of quarantine protocol violation. And Roger, if you could just go to the slides for this. Efforts are continuing to ensure that the health and safety of all local communities are enforced through the protocols outlined by the management of COVID-19. On Tuesday, 28th, 2020, the Ministry of Health and Wellness received information from a local bank of a returning national from the United Kingdom, UK, who arrived on Sunday, July 26, 2020, accessing services within the bank. The ministry contacted the Royal St. Lucia Police Force with the necessary information. On investigation, many breaches were noted, including leaving home quarantine in less than 14 days, receiving guests into the home during the quarantine period, providing inaccurate information on health authorities in relation to the number of persons residing at the dwelling house where quarantine was taking place. The individual in question and the remaining members of the household were all transferred to a government-operated quarantine facility where they were screened and tested. The family will complete the 14-day quarantine at that institution. And the Ministry of Health commends the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, the private institution associated with this case, and the community for their vigilance and swift response to this matter, said Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sharon Belmar-George. So she further adds that we wish to remind the public that applying for the privilege of home quarantine does not automatically mean that your request is approved. One must await a response of confirmation from the Department of Health and Wellness, as background checks will be conducted to support your request. Applicants too must remember that once approved, you must operate with integrity and follow the protocols agreed to, she added. With the reopening of the borders, visitors from the travel bubble have begun visiting St. Lucia. These visitors are required to submit a negative PCR COVID-19 test prior to arrival into the island within 7 days of travel. All arriving passengers from within the bubble must have traveled directly from a country within the bubble that have been in that country for at least 21 days. Bubble travelers do not require quarantine. However, they will be screened on arrival and are subject to all on-island protocols. Again, the Ministry of Health and Wellness takes the opportunity to remind the public that any known infringements on the part of persons approved for home quarantine or visitors outside the designated travel bubble should be anonymously reported to the 311 hotline or to the nearest police station or the Ministry of Health and Wellness at 468-5318 or 468-5349. So please take note of this latest statement coming from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Commendations to the vigilant community in reporting of quarantine protocol violation. And just to reiterate the word from the desk of the CMO, that institutional quarantine is the gold standard. And there have been a flood of applications, persons coming back into the country who are applying for home quarantine. And in some cases, even querying, perhaps they are being sidelined or not being considered. And, through all attempts, they're not being, considered for home quarantine. But in this specific case, we're seeing that there's been an infringement. And if this individual, God forbid, perhaps, would have been carrying the coronavirus, then they could have transmitted this to somebody in the community. And we would have had a much bigger situation to deal with had that individual just remained at home for the stipulated time. So please take note, if you are at home right now and you have been placed in home quarantine, we just want to appeal to you. I want to appeal to you on behalf of the people of St. Lucia to remain at home, to abide by the protocols until you are free to do otherwise. Please take note. We continue this morning with news from the Gender Relations Minister. She says services for gender-based violence should be declared essential services. Crisis and gender-based violence was one of the sessions held as part of the Caribbean Community's Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, CARICOM Impact's Virtual Security Conference 2020, themed Securing Our Community Within the Era of COVID-19 and Beyond. As the Minister for Education, Innovation, Gender Relations and Sustainable Development, Honorable Dr. Gail Rigobert, highlighting the many inadequacies in fighting gender-based violence, spoke to the alarming trends coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. The minister asserted that services to aid in addressing this perennial issue of gender-based violence are essential and should be made a priority by all member governments. We have the details in this report.
In July 2020, the Central Statistical Office of St. Lucia released the results of St. Lucia's National Crime Victimization Survey, which was strategic in understanding the limited formal reporting of gender-based violence during the COVID-19 pandemic. Minister for Education, Innovation, Gender Relations and Sustainable Development, Honorable Dr. Gail Rigobert, indicated that the report estimates that 10.3% of the population, 18 years and over in St. Lucia, experience at least one type of situation related to sexual harassment in the past 12 months. In the last incident, 81% were women, 17.65% were men, and 1.4% were intersex. 92.5% of the cases were not reported, as 63.3% of the individuals believed that it was not serious enough, while 42% believed that it happens all the time. Honorable Dr. Rigobert, highlighting what she described as frightening statistics, said that based on these responses, the incidence of gender-based violence may be far greater than reported.
What will most certainly be revealed in the ongoing assessments of the impact of COVID on women in the Caribbean and has been reported by Caribbean gender bureaus is the stark increase in the number of calls to the crisis lines and the COVID support hotlines from women in particular, seeking support for basic goods and services for mere survival for themselves and their families, even to the extent that these calls have almost replaced crisis calls for domestic violence. The economic fallout created by COVID-19 has increased the risk for gender-based violence exponentially in the region, in a region where poverty has a feminine face. Alarmingly, the extent of need seems to overshadow the experience of violence, even increased violence, which also has a significant economic cost to our already heavily indebted countries.
Honorable Dr. Rigobert explained that this is what unchecked, harmful gender stereotypes and gender norms do to our society, and this is how it is exposed in a crisis. She noted that the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare a crisis that has already been at the point of explosion for a while in the Caribbean region and other parts of the world, but had gone unacknowledged despite the many international and regional efforts at bringing it to the fore. The minister endorsed one of the 5 recommendations made by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean to governments of the region, which was a call to access finance from middle-income countries, as those most affected by decreased financing are those most vulnerable to matters related to gender-based violence, and the COVID-19 pandemic affords the opportunity to right the wrong.
To use the words of the regional leader, Alicia Barcena, chart the future more equal, inclusive, and sustainable, end of quote. I submit that a useful starting point is declaring services for gender-based violence as essential services. Essential services can never and will never be ignored, crisis or no crisis. In that way, when faced with a crisis like COVID-19, our most vulnerable will not be left behind, disenfranchised, facing silently and unacknowledged, literally even more deadly shadow pandemic. Their pain will be validated as our national efforts will agree with what they know in their souls to be true, that gender-based violence and the underlying norms that fuel it are not okay.
Honorable Dr. Rigobert added that if the gender inequality crisis is continuously ignored and the underlying gender beliefs, norms, and attitudes are not deliberately, strategically, and systematically tackled, they will continue to stifle and undermine gender equality strides the world over. The Gender Relations Minister asserted that the time has come for gender bureaus based in each Caribbean country to be strengthened so that they can fulfill their mandate of tackling harmful gender stereotypes by reviewing constitutional and legal provisions to foster non-discrimination and coordinating and monitoring gender mainstreaming in national development, and to embrace their role in national security both in and out of crisis. From the Government Information Service, I am Janelle Norville.
Thank you, Janelle, for that news report. We're hearing just now from the Gender Relations Minister, Honorable Dr. Gail Rigobert, that services for gender-based violence should be declared essential services. And that statement was made at one of the sessions held as part of the Caribbean Communities Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, CARICOM Impact Virtual Security Conference for 2020. We are due for another break this morning. When we come back, members of the public are urged to play their part to reduce vector-borne illnesses. We know that we are in the midst of the Atlantic hurricane season, and breeding grounds for vectors are ideal at this point in time. So we do hope you are playing your part in this respect. When we come back, the details to that story and more. Stay tuned.
Virus ready to harm us. Panic is not the answer. We can win this together.
Often use hand sanitizer. Better yet, use soap and water.
We must protect each other if we are to beat this corona.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. Be a soldier, together we can beat this corona.
corona. So you don't become the next case. Avoid touching your face. I'm sure you've been told so. Handshakes and hugging are a no.
Advice is you the please. Cover your mouth and your nose if you cough or sneeze.
Practice social distancing and avoid large social gatherings.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. St. Lucia be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
For further information, please contact the hotline at 311 or the Bureau of Health Education at 468-5349.
Thank you so much for staying tuned. You are watching the Morning Brew, NTN's morning update, bringing you the latest information in the 24-hour news cycle coming from the government of St. Lucia. Now, yesterday we did make a statement to the effect of the update on the 25th confirmed case of coronavirus in St. Lucia, but I thought it important enough to remind St. Lucians out there and to let St. Lucians in on what is the situation, because a lot of persons were worried, concerned with this latest case being an 89-year-old, I believe. The Ministry of Health and Wellness on Thursday, July 30th, confirmed St. Lucia's 25th case of coronavirus. The individual is in intensive care at the respiratory hospital, formerly the Victoria Hospital, and is being managed and cared for there at the moment. The clinical team reports that he is in stable condition and responding well to care. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sharon Belmar-George in the Ministry of Health and Wellness says the process of contact tracing continues.
The team continues investigations and contact tracing to establish the source and contain transmission. 4 caretakers and close relatives have been swabbed and placed in quarantine. 3 healthcare workers and 14 patients have been tested and placed in quarantine due to possible exposure. This gentleman received many visits by family and friends during his recuperation at home. Investigations continue into a possible contact if a travel history at this time. We await test results before any links are confirmed and communicated.
As St. Lucia began receiving international flights on Thursday, July 9th, that's last month, 2020, and in an effort to safely facilitate the return of nationals, quarantine centers have been set up using various hotels on the island, and Dr. Sharon Belmar-George did indicate that this has proven to be a very important measure in containing the coronavirus on island, and failure to adhere can have serious implications for disease containment. However, many individuals who have been granted home quarantine have not been adhering to those protocols established, and this can put the rest of the population at risk. We just opened this morning's NTN update with word of an individual who breached home quarantine, and this does not augur well for us as a nation.
All persons on home quarantine are required to stay indoors for 14 days. The public is asked to cooperate and encourage family members and friends who have returned from overseas and are presently in quarantine to remain at home for the 14-day duration. Failure to adhere can lead to community spread of COVID-19 at this time. The names of all persons in home quarantine are forwarded to the Royal St. Lucia Police Force to assist with compliance.
And the numbers that I gave again, the public is advised to alert the nearest police station or the Ministry of Health and Wellness at 468-5318 or 468-5349 with information in relation to anyone who has breached protocol, not just home quarantine guidelines, but broke the protocol in general. We continue with news this morning. Community members are called on to take the pledge and play a part in reducing vector-borne illness by keeping their surroundings clean. We have more in this report from Funel Neptune at the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
In light of the upcoming Vector Awareness Week observed from August 3rd to the 9th, the Environmental Health Division of the Ministry of Health has embarked on educating St. Lucians on taking proactive measures in their communities to reduce the risk of vector-borne illnesses. Environmental Health Officer for Vector Control, Charlotte Charles, spoke on the need to observe this week.
So every year we tend to see some issues in terms of vector control diseases that actually come up. So the entire aim of the week is to promote some level of awareness of vectors, the diseases that these vectors can spread, and what it is that we can do as a community and the country to reduce the number or the cases of vector-borne diseases that we see on island.
Charles also called for the participation and empowerment of community members in protecting the health of the community.
We need to take personal responsibility for our surroundings. We need to have that level of responsibility. We want to encourage persons to just take a minute or two, walk around your home, look for the possible breeding grounds of mosquitoes that you have. Look at the standing water. Mosquitoes do not need much water for them to breed. And in recent times, it has been raining quite heavily, and all these discarded containers, the garbage that we have, is collecting water, and they become potential and active mosquito breeding sites. So we get a lot of calls and complaints about mosquitoes, especially in recent times. So this is the thing that we want persons to bear in mind. You can make a difference in your own home and in your community.
Resident of Pavi, Jeremiah Joseph, applauded the St. Lucia Solid Waste Management Authority and the Environmental Health Division for assisting in an initiative in the fight against rodents and mosquitoes in his community.
We didn't want people to just come and just clean up. We wanted people to know exactly the proper way, because it's one thing of having a cleanup campaign, but it's the continuation. You know, you want people to take more responsibility of the community. So the Environmental Health Department decided, okay, what they could do, they could help us by, we could stage some meetings with the community, explaining to them how important it is to keep your community clean, the proper way of disposing of garbage, because you know, with marriage there's a lot of rodents, you know, of rats and mosquitoes, you know, all those vector-borne diseases that are in and could have impact on the health of the community.
Vector Awareness Week is being held under the theme, My Actions, My Community, My Health. Reporting from the Communications Unit of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, I am Fernell Neptune.
Thank you for that news report, Fernell. Again, a reminder to you, an advisory going out to ensure that during this Atlantic hurricane season, when we do see more rainfall at this time of year, that you are making every effort to ensure that your immediate environs around your home and your property is clean of any areas that might be the perfect breeding ground for vectors. We are due for another break this morning. Do stay tuned. When we come back, our final segment, special education teachers are being commended during this pandemic situation.
She's been watching, waiting, wondering when the sands of time will give way to a tide of change, and for yesterday and today to become a new tomorrow, for a time when her sun can kiss the cheeks of your loved one and her stars can twinkle in her honeymoon skies, when her earthly embrace will reassure and calm your soul, and her unique view can change your whole perspective. Proudly, she has risen to meet new challenges and to provide safe harbor to all who reach her shores. For her hopes and dreams still stand shoulder to shoulder, a precious reminder of experiences yet to come. So, wherever your moments and memories take you, let her sense of adventure set you free. She is St. Lucia. Let her inspire you.
Thank you so much for staying tuned. We're now down to our final segment of the Morning Brew. That is NTN's Morning Update, bringing you the latest news for this 24-hour news cycle from the government of St. Lucia. Special education teachers are being singled out for praise by the Ministry of Education for going above and beyond the call of duty during the pandemic. This came during the 30th July Disability Forum that was aired live on NTN on the topic Services Available to Persons with Disabilities in St. Lucia. We get the details in this report. Take a listen. Special Education Officer in the Department of Education, Dale Segist, is commending teachers of the 5 special education centers on island for exceeding expectations during the pandemic. The Learning from Home term, instituted by the ministry this past academic year, proved particularly challenging for special education in St. Lucia. While most students on island were able to tap into online alternatives for learning, this route was not an option for students with certain intellectual and physical disabilities. Additionally, these students weren't able to access the other services provided by special education institutions on island.
There are those who at special schools are getting therapeutic interventions, and the equipment is not available at home that is available at school, and the expertise is not very available with the parents. So that has been quite a challenge. In addition to that, there are many children whose diagnosis makes change a little bit difficult for them, particularly those on the autism spectrum, who need routine and who need regularity in terms of their experience. We were suddenly made to stay at home and learn from home, so that adjustment has been difficult for some of our students.
In an effort to reach as many students as possible with special needs, support groups by special education teachers sprouted to assist parents and caregivers during the pandemic.
I need to sing the praises of our teachers, because the teachers within the special schools have gone significantly above and beyond the call of duty to reach their students. They have formed WhatsApp groups with the parents and give input through that means. Some of them have used Zoom platforms, but in many cases they have prepared physical packages and sent these home to the students. So worksheets and activity sheets that they're able to do, and then the teachers check back with them. Many of the students have really enjoyed these types of activities. They have enjoyed seeing their teachers on the screen, and a couple of them have said that they would prefer to continue this way than to be back in school physically.
The Advocates Linking Resilience and Movement, ALRM, is one of the newly formed groups of trained professionals in special education that have come together for the sole purpose of tackling issues relating to parents and caregivers of children with disabilities and persons living with a disability. The group's long-term goal is to establish a national parent support group. Zanik Edward is one of the group's facilitators.
You will be seeing different PSAs, different videos from us where our students are concerned, because most of us are educators in the special field. So we will be trying to show the public the students' ability over their disability. We will continue looking at parents as individuals rather than as parents of a child with special needs. But we're looking at them as an individual, because I think they're forgetting themselves. And they have to remember you're a person too. You're separate from you being a mom or a dad of a child with a special need, and the entire situation, you are an individual first.
Zanik Edward and Dale Segist were speaking during a disability forum live on NTN on Thursday, 30th July 2020, organized by the ALRM group. The forum engaged professionals in the health, education, social transformation, and volunteer sectors. For the Government Information Service, I am Jessie Leonce reporting. Now that was the final news report coming out of the Morning Brew this morning, NTN's morning update for today, the 4th of August 2020. I just want to go back to yesterday when we saw the presentation of the Telethon committee on being under the Ministry of Tourism, making a special handover to 2 of the first applications that came through for assistance from agencies, that being the St. Lucia Hospitality and Tourism Association, as well as the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. The latter received $34,000 to go towards their efforts in dealing and managing COVID-19 in terms of the enforcement of the law, and the St. Lucia Hospitality and Tourism Association received $267,000 to go towards, which went towards the national feeding program. We know many persons, many institutions did put their shoulders to the work to ensure that persons would receive hot meals, persons who were at risk, vulnerable persons in our community. You would remember the lockdown. You would remember that there was a time of much uncertainty during this pandemic in St. Lucia when we had to close down our country. And we saw these persons, these hoteliers, volunteers, what have you, coming through to provide hot meals for the individuals at risk. So a gentle reminder on that. We have seen so far the telethon, the proceeds of the telethon going to good use. Back in April on Easter Sunday, these monies were raised. We saw the musicians coming out live here in studio to raise funds to go towards those who need it most at the time of this pandemic. Again, I'd like to thank you so much for watching. My name is Jessie Leon, signing off for now. This has been an edition of the Morning Brew for today, 4th August. Do tune in tomorrow. We do have an exciting program for you. We continue with the updates coming from the government of St. Lucia. They are important, especially at this time of COVID-19, in this COVID-19 scenario. So tune in tomorrow morning for more latest updates. Thank you so much for watching. We do encourage you to like our Facebook page if you've not yet done so. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you will always keep abreast. You will always know when we post new content, and urgent content, most importantly. We need everyone to know what's happening in real time. Again, thank you so much for watching. Do enjoy the rest of your day and stay tuned for more NTN programming.